The Constitution, let me get set up here for a second. The Constitution is not a self-enforcing document. It is based on an inspired holy document, I believe. I don't believe it is a holy document, but I believe it was inspired by one. But it is not self-enforcing. The words will not jump off the page. They won't leap forward and enforce themselves. So if the people of America would live free and enjoy the blessings of liberty and pass those blessings of liberty on to their posterity, they would have to be its champions. They would have to understand and be familiar with its content and its underlying principles. They would have to be committed to those underlying principles, wouldn't they? Let me come back to that, but let me just pause for a second and thank you, Mr. President, Madam Secretary, Mr. Chairman, and all the members of the Republican Club. I'm very grateful. And Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, I should say, I've been at this game about 22 years, and I don't think I've ever heard a better explanation of Romans 13 than you gave this evening. I'm indebted to you because I was mentally making notes to steal it. And while I'm on that thought, before I forget, tomorrow night at 7 p.m., my pastor, David Whitney, is going to do a Facebook Live on Institute on the Constitution and going to give an exposition of that subject, of Romans 13. And before he does, I'm going to fill him in on what you said. Because one of the things that I think people miss about that, and this is not where I was going to start, but let me just start here for a second. One of the things I think people miss about that is they miss who the rulers are. They miss who the ruler is. And you very carefully pointed out, in America, we are the rulers. We are self-governed. And Article 1, Section 1 of the Maryland Constitution says that all political government originates from the people and is a matter of compact or contract. And so it is incumbent upon those people who represent us. We don't have rulers. We have representatives. We are the rulers. And we act through this compact, this contract. And when the contract is broken, no one who breaks it can pretend to be the ruler, because they've broken the agreement by which the rulers have given them authority. And the way you expressed that, I think, was perfect. I'm very aware when I stand before this group that there's a lot of talent in this room. I have the greatest respect for the people here and what I have learned from the people here. As a matter of fact, when my wife found out where I was going to go speak tonight, and I told her who I was going to address, she said to me, "What are you going to tell those people that they don't already know?" Which presented that daunting problem for me. So what I thought I would like to do, just for a few moments, I don't know how many moments I have, but I am as much interested in learning from you tonight as you might be interested in learning something from me. We are living in, how can you say it, crazy times. These are the times that try men's souls. These are the times that men like John Cottonmire prepared us for and gave us insight about and warned us about. Interestingly, I had a conversation with my own daughter a few weeks ago, and I said, "Hon, I actually was worried about this kind of thing happening in America, but I thought that I would be dead and gone, and that it would be left up to you to fight these battles." And she said, "Well, welcome to the party, Dad." Welcome to the party. So if we're still breathing, if God is still giving us breath and grace, then this is our duty and this is our job to fight. So I thought what I might just do, maybe in no particular order if you don't mind, I'd just like to tell you about some of the things that I've been thinking about and writing about in these past few weeks. And then maybe have a conversation with you about your thoughts and your reflections and what you see coming and what you either agree with or disagree with respect to what ought to be, what's important to communicate now. Many of us in this room have been trying for more than 20 years to tell people about the Constitution, tell people about the foundational principles on which America is based, rehearse these things, articulate these things. We've been working it for all this time, and now, in these past 8 weeks, for me particularly, now my phone is ringing. Now people want to know what the Constitution says. What's that say? And I count it as a blessing, but it's about time. On that same score, I have to admit, in that same conversation with my daughter, I had said, well, you know, I'm doing these Facebook Lives now, hon. I'm like a Facebook guy. You know, I'm a Facebook guy. I'm doing this. And she said, well, Dad, it only took the end of the world for you to catch on and get it. Only took the world to stop for you to pick this up. So the very first thing I'm just turning to here, if I could just discuss with you for a moment, are executive orders. One of the things I've been trying to explain to people lately are what executive orders are and what they're not. And my recent piece I did on that, which I'm just going to paraphrase from here, is right now our lives are being severely affected by executive orders. So it's imperative for us to understand just what they are and what they are not. And way back in 1789, George Washington's first executive order, what they are claiming was the first executive order, was to the heads of his departments, and he said this, quote, to impress me with a full, precise, and distinct general idea of the affairs of the United States, unquote. And as you may note, the first president's order was addressed to officials of the executive branch of the national government, which makes sense because it was applicable to those who were already under his control, under his authority as head of that branch. You follow? So properly understood, this is the nature of executive orders. They are directives or policy instructions addressed to and binding upon persons who are already under the authority of the executive, but they have no binding effect on anybody else. They're not law, and they do not have the force of law. Remind me if I forget to come back to talk about the force of law for just a second, okay? I don't want to interrupt myself now like I just did, but I want to come back. But they do not have, they're not law, and they do not have the force of law. You're going to tell me the force of law, right? Only legislatures have lawmaking power, and that power is specified and limited by the Constitution. So if the governor of Maryland wanted to do so, he could direct the heads of his agencies and all the employees in the executive agencies to wear masks and stand 6 feet apart while they're in state office buildings. He could arguably order them to do that because they work for him. But he can't order us to do that because we don't work for him. As a matter of fact, he works for... I told you, this is a smart group, right? So while executive orders might have their purpose in place, it's crucial that all Marylanders, and especially those in law enforcement, understand that they are not law and cannot lawfully be enforced. So there is such a thing as an executive order. The typical example I always use in class is to say, well, let's just say a former governor of the state of Maryland passed away last week. Well, the current governor might say, in honor of that deceased gentleman, that we're going to fly all the flags in all the state office buildings at half-mast for the next 3 days to honor for that purpose. Well, see, because all the flags are under his authority and control, and all the people that put the flags up and down the flagpoles are under his control, and the land the flagpoles on is under his control as head of the executive branch. But he can't tell Ron Frazier to put his flag at half-mast in his yard because he doesn't work for him, right? The situation is out. That's the example I use. That's a proper executive order. But executive orders don't apply to anybody outside the executive branch. Unless you don't know what an executive order is and they tell you it applies to you and so you think it does. Right? Now what am I supposed to come back to? Thank you. It occurred to me as I was speaking, I actually had the privilege of talking to former Chief Justice Roy Moore earlier this week, or late last week, and while we were talking, he and I kind of both came to something together, and again, this is a pretty smart room, you guys probably already thought of this, but to say that something has the force of law is a tacit admission that it's not law? Because if it was law, you'd just say it was law. Why would you have to say it has the force of law, in fact, unless you were admitting that it's not law? Right? Is that a new one to anybody? Is that new to you? Good, good. So, they say regulations have the force of, right, because they're not law. I kind of came to this from the opposite direction, because one of the things that I have written about and actually written music about and sing about is courts cannot make law, right? Well, courts cannot make law, and we say that, well, read the document a court puts out. At the top of the page, it says judgment or ruling or opinion. It doesn't say law. So one of the ways that you can know that something's not law is that it's called something else. It's really called, yeah, right, so that's perhaps a small thought, but I share it with you. Kind of moving on. What I was working on today, and this I haven't published, but this is about, well, why all this testing? What's the testing all about? I'm a little confused, because if the COVID-19 recovery rates among the vast majority of the populace are beyond the 99th percentile, okay, the vast majority of the complex, not people over 70, but the vast majority of people, you have more than a 99% chance of surviving. Then why do we need to be testing and tracking or mapping or spending resources, which we've long ago depleted, on finding out who has already had it? What are we trying to accomplish by this? If the testing reveals that more people have been exposed than we formerly estimated, well, then doesn't that make the mortality rate even less? And if the testing reveals that less people have been exposed than we formerly estimated, then didn't we succeed in flattening the curve? We're getting there. But even if we didn't flatten the curve, whatever that means, the hospital systems didn't get overrun. So what are we doing? And am I wrong in my understanding that the human body, the way God made it, deals with viruses by naturally developing antibodies, which provide people immunity, and that communities of people mutually assist one another in resisting the virus through something that they call herd immunity, right? So the way to defeat the virus is to get it. Get it? Right? So I've heard theories, and you've heard theories, suggesting that what is really happening with the testing is something else. Maybe you might say the implementation of a centralized system of tracking vaccinations and population controls enforced through threats, intimidation, and police state methods, or something like that. You wouldn't say, Harold, you would never say that. But there are some, I'm here to tell you, there's some, you said, but some say that. So what I'm asking, and publicly just asking, is I'd like to hear a simple, straightforward, rational, and believable explanation of why we want to test, trace, track something that has already passed through the citizenry, leaving the overwhelming majority of us unaffected, and in some cases, unaware. Right? We don't. Why do we have to test and track that? For some other reason, right? And somebody said to me yesterday, and again, I'm humble before you because I think of things that you guys haven't thought of. But what if the test is the vaccination? I don't know. What if the test is more than a test? What? But anyway, I'd love to hear a rational explanation of why we're doing it. And in addition to that, I'd love to hear a rationalization of why we're following Fauci. He's appeared on national television delivering predictions of COVID-19 cases and deaths and issuing guidance to everybody. And based on those grim statistics, we closed down the world. But almost everything he said has been wrong.
I guess he's a false prophet.
And I'm giving it. I know I'd learned stuff here tonight. If he's a false prophet. And I'm being gracious by saying almost everything he said is wrong, because I think everything he said is wrong. On March 11th, Fauci said that the COVID-19 mortality rate was 10 times worse than the seasonal flu, and he estimated about 500,000. Earlier, there'd been 220 million. On March 30th, based on a revised model, he lowered his prediction to 200,000 deaths. Then on April 9th, Fauci said the death toll would only be around 60,000, roughly the same as the common flu. So, despite the unprecedented hype, the virus is no worse than the flu, and the crushing of the economy, the bankruptcies, the suicides, the overdoses, the unemployment, and suspended access to health care wasn't necessary. And Fauci's still at it, right? On CNN on April 10th, and this is it's over a month ago, he recommended that the government issue certificates of immunity that people would be required to carry in order to move around freely. He said that on April 10th. So given his models and his revised models and all his predictions and failures, the fact that Donald, you're fired, Trump, right, hasn't fired Fauci actually worries me. Because it makes you wonder, does it make you wonder what else is going on?
He's part of the executive branch.
Yes, he is. I guess probably the most important point I want to emphasize, and again, I don't feel the need to emphasize it to you, but this is what, I don't want to miss this point, the bigger audience, right, is that don't be fooled by any argument that you hear TV attorneys or constitutional experts come on, and they talk about the balancing of interests. They talk about least restrictive means to meet compelling government interests, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all words that come from lawsuits that have to do with what passes for First Amendment jurisprudence over the last 70 years. But if you read the First Amendment or the Second Amendment, the word balance isn't in there. That's a false pretext that's used to discuss what government's doing versus constitutional rights. But you hear it all the time. On Friday, May 1st, Judge Andrew Napolitano was interviewed by Stuart Varney on the Fox Business Channel, and he was asked to comment about that restaurateur in Maine who said he was going to open his restaurant no matter what the governor of Maine said. And he was asked to comment on that, and Napolitano said this, and of course I'm quoting him because I agree with him. He said, the lockdown in Maine, just like the lockdowns everywhere else, is without legal authority. The overwhelming majority of Americans may cooperate with it, but it's not the law. Governors don't write the law. Only state legislatures do. What this restaurateur is railing against is an executive order written by the governor of Maine without the legal authority to do so. I hope Napolitano went on. He said, I hope he defies the governor of Maine and brings this to a head. And if it ends up in court, he should prevail. Well, like I said, I'm quoting Napolitano because he's right. Only legislators have lawmaking power, and we already talked about that. The governor, who's the head of the executive branch, does not have those powers, and every state constitution has a separation of powers article, which says that somebody vested with the authority of one branch can't exercise the powers that are vested in another branch. So, I guess the even bigger point is no one has the authority to violate the Constitution or suspend the Constitution. And you consider this. The office of governor is a creation of the Maryland Constitution. The office of governor is created by that. If the governor suspends the Maryland Constitution, doesn't he suspend his own authority? Doesn't he suspend himself? So, there is something else going on. And anytime, this is like what you wanted to discuss, the Kennedy assassination or if you want to discuss what you believe to be based on your conclusions and your life experience, and you don't know it to absolutely be, somebody's going to find some scintilla of way that you're wrong, and then try to destroy your whole line of thinking. So I try to, when I'm speculating, to identify it as such, that this is my opinion or this is my conclusion based on the fact that, I've drawn breath for 67 years and I've kind of been around a little bit. But recently a friend of mine posted something and she was chastising herself and she said she should have seen this coming. And the tip-off to what was coming, she said, the phrase new normal was ejected so early and so often by experts, medical experts, media experts, politicians. Everybody was seeming to be on this new normal page. But that was a signal of underlying ulterior motives and should have alerted her to the potential villainy. And with the growing skepticism, she asked, how did they all know back in January that the old normal wasn't going to work anymore? How did they all know that the old normal was extinct? And how did Anthony Fauci know back in 2017 that there would be a surprise viral attack during the Trump administration? How do you think about that? How do you say that within the next 3 years there's going to be a surprise attack? Well, clearly it wasn't a surprise to him. So then she went on and she became infuriated when she considered that the lockdowns and the loss of livelihood and liberty may have been calculated, and that the social distancing and face masking served no medical purpose, but seemed designed to take advantage of the good nature and the self-sacrificing predisposition, I should say, of the American people. And they probably knew that they could take advantage of that. But now, as our governor and other governors delay the restoration of economic and religious liberty, and they add more conditions based on more fake science, I told her that regardless of whether the virus is fatal or phony, the lockdowns and the shutdowns and the mandates for social distancing and face masks have no lawful basis. I know you've already come to that conclusion, but many people have not. So I'm trying to make that point. And the widespread notion that governors have some special emergency powers which they can be invoked as an excuse to suspend the Constitution is a hoax and a fraud. If you think of it as a picture frame, Article 1, Section 1 says all authority comes from the people. It has to come from inside that frame. There's no place outside the picture frame out here somewhere there, oh, there's these emergency powers that we can call on. So my biggest fear is that we're now going to be happy and follow these phased in 1, phased in 2, phased in 3, because any central plan for reopening is just as lawless as the lockdown. In fact, my reason and experience tells me that it's the reason for the whole deal. Phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 are not the end of Hogan's tyranny. They're actually the commencement of it. Right. So right. So my friend, I've spent a couple of days working very hard with some friends out in Spokane County, Washington, because they have a county council out there, actually a commission, that wants to resist the governor's tyranny, but they're scared. And of course they asked their county attorney for his opinion, and what do you think he said? Right? As Kevin Costner said in that movie JFK, what do you expect from a pig but a grunt? Right? So that was what I said to him about his county attorney. But anyway, so my friend, I told you that to say that my friend said, all these phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 plans, he said, here's my 3-phase plan. Ready, set, go. Ready, set, go. Because the new normal is not necessary, and it's not natural, and it's not normal. So those are some thoughts I wanted to. Let me do one more here if I could. Abnormal. Well, more and more we are hearing from doctors and other health professionals questioning whether the dangers of the coronavirus have been overstated and reaction to it overblown. I wrote this some time ago at the beginning of this. Even beyond the controversial reports concerning the downsizing of the lethality that Neil Ferguson, who was the guy that started the whole thing, right? The Imperial College of London scientist, we struggle to separate the emotions from the issues and parse our way through the political agendas. But it reminds me of a phrase that goes back to Vietnam days, which is, are we going to destroy the village in order to save it? Don't you see we had to destroy the village in order to save it? Let me put it this way. Which of these two options would you choose? Would you like to have your livelihood, your liberty, your peace of mind, your religious freedom, your constitutional government, and have a chance of getting a virus that you will almost certainly survive? Or would you like to have your livelihood destroyed, your liberty lost, your religious freedom lost, live under a police state, and have a chance of getting a virus that you will almost certainly survive? Which way do you want to live? So as I said at the beginning, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, provides limits on the powers and authorities of the federal, state, and local governments, but the words are not going to leap off the page and enforce themselves, which is why I'm grateful for people like you. I'm grateful for Reopen Maryland. I'm grateful for Tim Walters and his leadership in this, and I think he's doing an absolutely marvelous job. I will tell you something else about Tim Walters. Back in at the end of my term in the county council, when I presented a resolution that the county would treat the preborn children as human beings. The Republicans in my circle there in Anne Arundel County ran to the corners like when you turn on the light and the roaches run to the corners. They just, the one person that, and Tim Walters was actually approached by some of what passes for leadership and encouraged to stay away from my resolution and not support it. Well, Tim Walters was true blue, absolutely true blue. Stood by me and stood by that and testified and stayed up till whatever, 3 in the morning, our session there. So I have the greatest regard for him, and I'm grateful for his leadership in let me conclude by telling you one quick story, which was this weekend. I got a call, I guess it was Friday morning, from State Senator Johnny Salling from Dundalk, Essex area, Baltimore County, and that's actually where I grew up. And he was telling me about his pastor at Calvary Baptist Church in Dundalk, and who goes?
I go to church.
Do you?
Yeah.
Were you there yesterday morning?
I was there for the late service.
The Sunday night service, the Sunday afternoon service. Well, I got a call from Johnny Salling, and he asked me to talk to the pastor because the pastor, whose name is Stacy Shiflett, was convicted he was going to open. It's just time to open the church. It's time to get back to worshiping God publicly. And he was looking for some information and some counsel. And so I ended up going yesterday morning to Calvary Baptist Church. And while there was some tension, by the way, they hired David Gibbs III to come in. He's the National Center for Law and Liberty, I think. And he came in and actually acted as their counsel, but my wife and I went over there. And proud to be there, pleased to be there, humbled to be there. And this pastor, Stacy Shiflett, just gave he's a Southern Georgia kick sermon. It was just a marvelous place to be, and I was blessed by God to be there. And it was, although he had gotten, I think, from the health department, the Baltimore County Health Department, some kind of, he said, communication the night before by email saying, I guess, some kind of warning. I don't know what the substance of it was. But it didn't deter him, and he opened. And so far as I know, some TV stations showed up, but I don't think anybody else showed up. So, I mean, I don't know that they didn't show up by satellite or helicopter or whatever else. I have no idea. But I didn't see him, and it was just a marvelous place to be. And I was grateful to be able to be at that church and witness that courage and that resistance. And all of this, folks, all of this deserves the utmost resistance. In whatever way that you can resist, in whatever strategy you want to use to resist, this needs to be absolutely resisted. It has no lawful place. And regrettably, the American people don't know the rules well enough and don't know the law well enough, because I really do think that if we did know the law more, these kind of situations would not occur. Because I often say you can't conquer a Christian people, because a Christian people will see it coming. So if you want to conquer a Christian people, the first thing you have to do is to de-Christianize them. So that, and then they really will have conquered themselves. And knowledge about the Constitution and the rule of law and the underlying principles which undergird it is part of that Christian belief and understanding. We are called upon to be good citizens, there's never been a time in my life that I've seen what's going on now. But being with people like you and being able to see your full face and being able to shake your hand and being able to fellowship is a huge asset to us. And whatever we do, we should not relinquish it. So I'm going to... Oh, I'm sorry. He was introducing me to the pastor and asking me to come. Yes. I'm finished my remarks. Thank you very much.
Do you have time for questions?
Yeah, of course.
One of the things we wanted to hear about were the sheriff's powers to resist, and in a way, that might help more people to resist if they know their sheriff is going to do what he ought to do.
Thank you very...
May I add
Yes, go ahead.
on that? Dancock said at the rally that there are friends in the thin blue line that are not enforcing illegal orders. We have friends in law enforcement that understand the Constitution.
I'm so sorry that I didn't actually mention that in my remarks. But let me. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I just want to make a point about that, because I think people get, Hogan literally in his executive orders says that all law enforcement personnel in the entire state are to obey them and enforce them, right? And he's authorizing them to do that.
Right. Which is outside the picture frame. Right.
Total nonsense.
Right.
The sheriff and his deputies are not under the governor. They don't have to listen to him. Every municipality that has a police force doesn't have to listen to him. No county police have to listen to him.
Let Mr. Peroutka talk.
No, you're.
I've just said, I've heard this, and I just wanted to.
No, you've actually told me something that I wasn't aware of, because for him to claim such authority, that they're all under his authority, that's outside the picture frame and totally lawless and unenforceable and shouldn't be enforced. One of the things that I did early on was to put together a letter to law enforcement officials. And actually, it's now I've improved it a little bit. It's now kind of looks like a church bulletin, which is on purpose, actually, because I'd appreciate it if you think something of this document, you might give it to your pastor and have him put it in the church bulletin. and because the sheriffs, for example, are the chief legal officer, chief law enforcement officer of the county, what they call the CLEO. He's elected by the people. He's actually, we've talked about the concept of interposition. He's the guy who's supposed to, instead of turning facing us and being the little commissar of the tyrant, he's supposed to turn around with his back to us and with his shield and defend us from the tyrant. That's his sworn duty. It's also because of their sworn duty to the Constitution. It's also what police officers and any other law enforcement officer is supposed to do. But many of them don't know it. Many of them do, and I think all across the country. And I'm working with Sheriff Richard Mack of the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association, and we've been working together on some things the last couple of months. And one of them is this. And if I could just tell you what this says, and again, there's a Maryland version of this, which I first wrote. But then, because people across the country wanted, I've developed just an all-states version of it as well. And it starts, it says it's a letter to law enforcement officials, and it says, "Dear fellow American." Right? There are many who are saying that this current crisis makes it necessary to suspend the exercise of constitutionally protected rights, including the freedom to practice religion, the freedom of assembly and association, as well as the freedom to move about freely without molestation. But this is precisely what Article 44 of the Constitution of Maryland addresses and forbids. Article 44 states as follows, that the provisions of the Constitution of the United States and of this state apply as well in time of war as in time of peace, and any departure therefrom under the plea of necessity or any other plea is subversive of good government and tends to anarchy and despotism. So it couldn't be more clear. Every Declaration of Rights in every state doesn't have it as clearly put as Maryland, but it's as straightforward as it could be. I read this. I'm trying to not tell you who this is. I read this to someone who was in Congress, and he wasn't familiar with it. If we don't know the rules, my friend Howard Phillips, my mentor Howard Phillips, used to say to me, "Michael, thou must know the rules about whatever you're dealing with. You got to know the rules." So we don't know the rules. But anyway, it goes on. In point of fact, no governor in any state has the authority to suspend the Constitution, and any attempt to do so is an act of lawlessness and a violation of his or her oath of office. And then it says, "Respectfully, sir, when you took your oath of office, you swore obedience and fidelity to the United States Constitution and the Constitution of Maryland. You solemnly declared that you would always follow the Constitution. You did not swear allegiance to a mayor or a governor or a police chief or a president. Right now, I am encouraging you to remember that solemn promise and to live up to its terms. Because right now, as your country is in peril, it is especially crucial that you rededicate yourself to this noble calling and duty. Your fidelity," and here's where the rubber hits the road here, "your fidelity to your oath and to the rule of law requires you to abstain from enforcing any edict or order from a governor or any executive which it lacks constitutional authority. Your duty requires that you resist such edicts and orders and that you act in such a manner as to shelter and protect the citizenry from all acts of lawlessness, even and especially when they originate from civil authorities." So my idea was that this is something you could hand to a law enforcement official, or send to them, or communicate to them in some way, or use. So this is on the Institute on the Constitution website, and actually this all states version will be on by tomorrow morning. But the Maryland version is on there now, and you simply print it out and fold it in half, and you can do it. And very importantly, feel free to adjust it. If you don't think it meets your circumstance, edit it and make it yours. Make it yours, please. Make it, and if you have ideas that you think make it better, please let me know those as well. But is that helpful with respect to the? Yeah, sheriffs have the duty, and police officers have the duty to us. I'm sorry, I don't have my Constitution of Maryland right in front of me. Article 6, maybe it is, that says that the police power of the state The infrastructure and the police power of the state belong to the people. They're our state police. They're not the governor's state police. They're ours.